The final type of tissue in this chapter is the nervous tissue. So the four tissues we've talked about are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and now finally nervous tissue. Nervous tissue you probably know a little bit about, you probably know its function, and that is communication. So it's found in the brain and spinal cord and in the nerves. The main cells of the nervous tissue are called neurons. These are kind of the superstars. But there are other cells that are associated with the nervous system as well, and they're called neuroglia. And we'll talk more about these when we get to the nervous system later in the semester, but just keep those words in mind. We're going to talk now a little bit about the neurons, because they're the signaling cells, where the neuroglia, these are the guys that are they're helping out. It's not just helping out, they're really, really important, but they're helping out the neurons to carry out their function. So neurons have three parts of their cell. They have what's called a dendrite, they have a cell body, and they have an axon. So if we look at a nerve cell, here is the cell body. Now the cell body is the main part of the cell. It has the nucleus, it has all the other organelles. Coming off of the cell body, we have multiple dendrites. The job of the dendrites is to pick up signals from incoming, either from other cells, other nerve cells, or from stimuli that we're receiving from the environment. So the dendrites pick up information and take it to the cell body. Then we have an axon. The axon's job is to send that signal somewhere else. So this axon is sending out a signal, and you can see it has multiple little nerve endings here, where it's going to either maybe connect to a muscle or connect to another nerve or whatever it might be to send that signal on. So this is essentially the electrical system of our body, and we're sending these signals all around. So what might happen, so we might receive, so someone might, you might get poked by a pin, let's say. So that information is picked up by the nerve cells in your skin, and then those signals are sent through the cell body to an axon, which eventually takes that information to the spinal cord and then up into the brain. And we've got a few different neurons along that pathway up into your brain. Your brain then decides what to do about that, and then it sends a signal back down through the neurons, back down to that area, and either you pull the pin out of your hand or whatever it might be. So that's how the nervous system is sending things around. These other cells here, astrocytes, microglia, oligodendrocytes, these are examples of neuroglia, and their job is to support this neuron. And you can see how they're doing that. The astrocyte giving nutrients to the neuron, the microglia are going around and cleaning things up and keeping things in order. And then the oligodendrocytes have an interesting job. They wrap around the neuron, and they form a sheath called a myelin sheath, which is basically just a fatty covering that insulates the neuron and helps the message be sent even faster down this neuron. So here's the neuroglia. We talked about them just a little bit, just a second ago. All right, so those are the different types of tissues, the epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. The last thing to talk about in this chapter are glands and membranes. So these are other things we find inside the body. So a gland is a place where products are secreted out of the body, either out to the outer surface of the body or to the inside outer surface of the body, if that makes sense. So into the cavity, our body cavity, our digestive tract, respiratory tract, or whatever it might be. That's still the outside environment, even though it's inside our body. These are mainly formed of epithelial tissue. So glands are epithelial tissue. And there's two types, exocrine glands and endocrine glands. Exocrine means out. And this is what I was just talking about just a second ago, where these are secreted to the outer surface of the body or into a body cavity. So sweat glands, mucus-producing glands inside our respiratory tract or inside our intestinal tract. Those are all examples of exocrine glands. Okay, there is one other type of gland, and that's an endocrine gland, still made of epithelial tissue. Endo means in, so these are glands that secrete substances into our body, such as into the bloodstream. Or these are hormone-producing cells that are going to secrete things, and these are transported around the inside of our body and target different places. So the exocrine glands and endocrine glands. Okay, membranes. There are some membranes inside our body that are important. And these are mostly made of epithelial as well, because the membranes are going to be on the outer side, outside of our body, or inside lining our cavities. So the mucous membranes, these line the interior walls of the organs and tubes that open to the outside of the body, respiratory tract, digestive tract, etc. And these have an epithelium tissue, epithelial layer with loose connective tissue underneath. And they have cells that produce mucus. We have serous membranes, which we have talked about in a previous lecture, parietal and visceral. So these are membranes that line the organs of the inside of our body. So the parietal membrane is on the outer walls. This is what connects the organ to the cavity that it is in. It lines the cavity. And then the visceral membrane is actually on the organ. It's lining the organ. And in between, we have a little layer of serous fluid that is there for lubrication. So these are the serous membranes. In the serous membranes, we have a few different types we've talked about before. We have the pleural membrane. These are in the lining our lungs, so they're in the thoracic cavity. The parietal is lining the thoracic cavity itself. The visceral is on the lungs. We have the pericardium, which is lining the heart, and the peritoneum, which is lining the abdomen. So we have the parietal, which is lining the abdominal wall, and then we have the visceral, which is covering the organs in that cavity. Two other types of membranes. We have synovial membranes. Synovial membranes are found in joints. So they are composed of connective tissue. So remember how we have hyaline cartilage that's lining our bones at the joints. So that's part of the synovial membrane. And fluid is secreted into the synovial cavity, and that allows for lubrication, so allows our joints to move without bone scraping against bone. We also have meninges. Meninges are membranes that cover the brain and spinal cord. They are all connective tissue, and they are protective. And we'll talk more about the meninges. But you may have heard of meningitis, for example. Meningitis is an inflammation of the meninges in the brain and spinal cord. And then the last one is the cutaneous membrane, and this is simply the skin. So it's made of epithelial tissue, the keratinized stratified squamous. So remember, stratified meaning many layers, squamous meaning flat cells. And then there's that dense connective tissue underneath, the dense irregular connective tissue that makes the dermal layer of our skin. And it's all about protecting the outer layer of our skin. And that is it for this chapter 4. So if you have any questions, let me know.